one-to-one function here, and we're going to state the domain and range of it and its inverse. And the function is f of x equals 5 over 9x minus 1. Currently, this is a one-to-one function, meaning that its inverse is going to have the domain and range flipped, meaning that the domain of this original function will be the range of the inverse function, and vice versa. Let's start by finding the inverse function here. We've got f of x equals 5 over 9x minus 1. First thing I'm going to do, change the f of x into y so that it's easier to form the following equations. Then we're going to swap the y and x variables, so every y becomes an x, and every x becomes a y, so 9y minus 1. Then we're going to try and find y on its own. So first thing I'm going to do, because the y is in the denominator, I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 9x minus 1 here. So that's going to be x times 9y minus 1 equals 5. Then I want the y on its own, so we're going to move the x to the right side. And the way we do that is, now we have 9y minus 1 over equals 5 over x. Now I want to get rid of the minus 1, so I move that to the right side. Now we have 9y equals 5 over x plus 1. And reminder that the plus 1 comes separately and not on the numerator, because that would mean something entirely different. And now I want the y on its own, so we're going to divide both sides by 9. And the way we do that is we multiply the denominator of the right side by 9. So this becomes 5 over 9x plus 1 is the same as 1 over 1. So when we multiply the denominator by 9, it becomes 1 over 9. So now I've managed to find y on its own, which means that we have arrived at our inverse function. So let's rewrite that down here. We're going to have the inverse function. The notation is f to the minus 1 of x equals 5 over 9x plus 1 over 9. We've managed to find y on its own here. We've successfully found our inverse function, so let's rewrite that. The notation is going to be f to the minus 1 of x, and we rewrite the entire thing. So 5 over 9x plus 1 over 9. And this is our inverse function and our original function. We are not quite done yet because the question is asking for the domain and range of these two functions. Now remember that the original function is a one-to-one, meaning that we can find the domain and range of either of these functions and work out the domain and range of the other one. I'm going to start by finding the domain of the original function here. Now I see a division symbol, which means that we want to avoid division by 0. So we're going to have x. We start with all real numbers, and then we have the exclusions. So we don't want 9x minus 1 to be equal to 0. So we solve that to be unequal to 0. So 9x, move 1 to the right side, 9x is not equal to 1. So x cannot be equal to 1 over 9. And we put that in our domain here. Now I'm going to want to find the domain of the inverse function here. So again, I see division symbols, so I know that I want to avoid division by 0. So once again, we start off with x is all real numbers, and then we include what we want to exclude. So here it's going to be, we want 9x to not equal 0. So when we divide 9x by 9, we're still left with 0. So we have x cannot be equal to 0. Now that we know both domains of our functions, we can go ahead and figure out the range from here. So the range of this original function is going to be the domain of the inverse function, because they are one-to-one functions. So we just copy out the domain of the other function. X is all real numbers except 0. And over here, the range of the inverse function is the domain of the original. So we have x is all real numbers except for 1 over 9. And this is our final answer. You found my guidance of today's question useful, and if you have any of your own questions, leave them in the comments and I will get to them. See you next time.